came home late. It was nearly 11 p.m. when the main door opened. The mansion was dim, warm lamps glowing softly in the hallways. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that reminded him of their first night. He loosened his tie, exhaling a tired breath. Work hadn't been difficult. His mind had. All day he kept thinking of that moment in the hallway, the way Taehyung's fingers had gently tugged his sleeve, almost shy. How innocent the gesture had been, how easily he crushed it. His chest tightened again, that uncomfortable knot under his ribs. He sighed and started up the stairs. Then he heard it. A sound. Soft, gentle. Not a voice, not words. Music. A piano. Jungkook paused. Someone was playing, very quietly, as if afraid to be heard. He followed the sound down the hall, to a glass room with tall windows facing the garden. The lights were dim, only the moonlight spilling in. Taehyung sat at the grand piano, his posture careful, elegant, fingertips moving with the lightest touch. His eyes were lowered, lashes dark against his skin. The melody was soft, delicate, almost fragile, the kind of music that sounded like someone talking without words. Jungkook stood by the doorway, listening. He didn't interrupt. He didn't speak. He just listened. Because Taehyung was speaking, through his hands, through quiet. It was the first time Jungkook realized Taehyung didn't lack a voice. He just used a different one. Taehyung finished the piece, hands slowing until the last note faded into silence. Only then did he notice Jungkook. His body stiffened in surprise, hands going still. Jungkook stepped closer, slowly, as if not to scare him. I didn't know you played. Taehyung looked down, fingers curling slightly. He signed something. I learned at home. His expression didn't change, but the message behind it was sad. Not because he learned, but because of where he learned. Jungkook sat on the bench beside him, not too close. Play again, he said. His voice was gentle, almost quiet like Taehyung. Taehyung blinked. His eyes lifted to Jungkook's, searching, as if asking, "Are you sure?" Jungkook nodded once. So Taehyung placed his fingers back on the keys. This time, the song was different, softer, sadder, something that sounded like loneliness. Jungkook listened, heart tightening with every note. That was when he noticed it. The scars, faint ones, on Taehyung's hands. Thin, small, pale. Not from accidents. From punishment. Something dark ran through Jungkook's chest. Not anger at Taehyung. Anger for him. Anger at whoever had hurt him. His voice was soft when he spoke. Taehyung. Taehyung paused just slightly, but kept playing. Jungkook swallowed. He didn't know how to ask. He didn't know if he had the right, but the question left him anyway. Those scars. Who? Taehyung's fingers froze. The music stopped. His shoulders curled inward, his hands pulled back from the keys and folded in his lap, as if trying to hide. Jungkook didn't need an answer. He knew. He knew too well. So Hitchin, Lisa. Years of silent cruelty. Taehyung's breathing was small, quiet, the kind that came from trying not to break. Jungkook's voice softened so much it was almost a whisper. You don't have to tell me anything. Taehyung's shoulders loosened just slightly. Jungkook continued. But I want you to know I won't ever touch you like that. I won't ever hurt you. Taehyung's eyes lifted. There was surprise there, but also caution. Hope was dangerous. Taehyung signed slowly. I know. Then added, I saw you last night. Jungkook blinked. Taehyung signed again. You sat beside me. You didn't leave. His eyes lowered. Thank you. The thank you was so small, so quiet, so heartfelt, it hurt. Jungkook inhaled carefully. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't speak. He just let the silence sit between them. A gentle silence, not a heavy one. After a few seconds, he reached out, very slowly, and placed his hand near Taehyung's on the piano, not touching, just close. Close enough to say, I'm here. Close enough to say, you're not alone. Taehyung's fingers trembled once, but he didn't move his hand away. They sat like that, breathing, sharing quiet. Later, when they went back to their rooms, Jungkook stopped at his door. He looked back at Taehyung in the hallway. His voice was soft, not cold, not guarded. Good night, Taehyung. Taehyung looked up, his lips curved, very small, but real, and he signed, good night. Jungkook watched him go into his room. He didn't close his own door right away. He stood there for a few seconds longer, feeling something he couldn't name yet, something warm, something delicate, something new. In his room, Taehyung sat on his bed. He touched his chest lightly. He didn't know this feeling either, but for the first time, he did not feel afraid of tomorrow. The morning began with silence. Jungkook woke up before the sun. His room was filled with dim, early light, filtered through pale curtains. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, and for a moment. But then he heard movement from Taehyung's room. Soft, careful, quiet. Taehyung was already awake. He stood near the window. Jungkook watched him for a moment, breathing out slowly. Why are you up so early? He asked. Jungkook. Taehyung's shoulders stiffened. Jungkook realized something. Taehyung moved like someone who had been punished for mistakes. There was a quiet precision in his actions. Too careful. Too practiced. The word left Jungkook before he thought it. Jungkook didn't know what he wanted to say. He just didn't like the way Taehyung was leaving the room without a trace. Sit, he said eventually, motioning toward a chair. Taehyung didn't move for a moment. Maybe he was unsure whether it was a request or a command. Then, slowly, he walked to the chair and sat, hands folded neatly in his lap like a student waiting to be scolded. The air felt fragile. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair. Look, I said something yesterday about this marriage not being real. Taehyung's eyes lifted just a little. But I didn't mean... Jungkook exhaled through his teeth. Actually, no. I did mean it, but not in the way you think. Taehyung blinked once. His posture didn't change. Long pause. Jungkook searched for the right words. Thoughtful. I didn't want a marriage based on running from scandal. I didn't want to be some backup choice. Taehyung lowered his gaze again, and Jungkook felt a flicker of frustration. Annoyed. Are you even listening? Taehyung nodded. Slow. Silent. Jungkook frowned. Then look at me. Taehyung looked up, and Jungkook felt something strange hit his chest. Those eyes. They didn't look empty. They looked sad. tired. Tired in a way a young man shouldn't ever have to be. This wasn't disinterest. This was someone who had learned that reacting only made things worse. Jungkook realized he was raising his voice a little. He softened it, just a little. I won't hurt you. I'm just talking. Taehyung didn't relax, not even a little. And that hurt, because it meant someone else had taught him different. Jungkook swallowed, feeling something warm and sharp build behind his ribs. After breakfast, Mrs. Chun showed Taehyung around the house. The garden is always open. You can sit there anytime. And the library is here. You can read whenever you want, she said with a warm smile. Taehyung paused at the library door. His eyes softened. Books. Jungkook noticed. You like reading? He asked. Taehyung nodded once. Mrs. Chun clapped her hands softly. Good. No one reads in this house except me. I finally have company. Taehyung smiled, just a little. It was small, fragile, but genuine. Really saw it. Something warm flickered in his chest. But before it could grow, memories hit him. Lisa's face, her laughter, her running away. The humiliation, the bitterness returned like smoke, dark and choking. His smile disappeared, and his voice turned sharp without thought. Just don't touch any of the rare ones. They're expensive. The moment shattered. Taehyung's shoulders tensed instantly. The small smile vanished. He nodded, stepped back, hands returning to that folded, obedient position. Mrs. Chun gave Jungkook a disappointed look. Jungkook looked away. He hadn't meant. Not like that. But the damage was done. Taehyung had retreated again, back into his silence, back behind the invisible wall he always carried. That night, Jungkook showered and came out to find Taehyung already asleep. Blanket folded perfectly over him. Jungkook stared. Jungkook sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his face. He didn't hate Taehyung. He hated the situation. He hated how his pride kept bleeding open. He hated how every time he looked at Taehyung, he saw the ghost of a wedding that was never his to begin with. But Taehyung wasn't the one who hurt him. Taehyung was just someone who had been hurt too many times already. Jungkook lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling. The room felt wrong. Too big. Too quiet. Somewhere in the dark, he heard Taehyung shift. A small exhale. A tiny sound. Almost like fear. Jungkook closed his eyes. I don't know how to do this, he whispered into the night, voice barely audible. He didn't expect an answer. He didn't get one. But he wished, for the first time, Taehyung could speak. Not for communication, but because Jungkook had a sudden, aching desire to hear what Taehyung's voice sounded like. The mansion was quiet that night, except for the distant rumble of were-dimmed, casting long shadows that stretched across the polished marble floors. Taehyung had always loved the night in theory, the gentle hush of the world after sundown. But tonight, the darkness felt different, heavy, threatening. He was walking to the library to retrieve a book he wanted to read, fingers brushing against the walls for guidance. As he stepped into the corridor, the faint flicker of a candlelight at the far end seemed to stretch, elongating the shadows until they twisted into shapes his mind could barely recognize. Suddenly, a memory flashed. Sharp, unbidden. He was a boy again, alone, locked in a small, dark room, the air thick and stifling. His stepmother's angry shouts echoing outside. Lisa's cruel laughter slicing through the walls. Every whispered word of criticism, every sharp reprimand, every moment of punishment. The fear had taught him silence. Survival meant stillness. Survival meant quiet. And now, in the dimly lit mansion corridor, that terror returned. Taehyung froze. His heart pounded so hard he was certain it would burst. His chest tightened. His hands trembled, fingers curling into fists. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to disappear. A sudden creak of the wooden floor under his foot sent him spinning, and he stumbled backward. Panic rose like a tidal wave, suffocating and relentless. He pressed himself against the wall, breathing ragged, his mind trapped in a whirlwind of fear and helplessness. And then Jungkook appeared. "Taehyung," he said softly, voice steady but low, anchoring him in reality. "It's okay. I'm here." Taehyung's body jerked at the sound, but something in Jungkook's tone, the calm, measured reassurance, cut through the panic just enough to anchor him. Slowly, hesitantly, he turned his head, eyes wide and glassy. Jungkook took a careful step closer. "You're not alone. Not anymore. You don't have to be afraid." Taehyung's knees gave out, and he sank to the floor. His breaths came in short, ragged bursts. The darkness around him felt alive, threatening. And yet, the presence beside him, solid and unwavering, made him want to reach out, to lean, to trust. "Look at me," Jungkook said gently. "I won't leave. I'm not going anywhere." The words, though simple, carried weight. A promise, a shield, a lifeline. Taehyung's trembling fingers reached toward Jungkook almost instinctively. Jungkook's hand found his, holding it gently but firmly. "You're safe," Jungkook whispered. "I've got you." And something shifted. Slowly, like a fragile bridge being rebuilt. Taehyung leaned against Jungkook, letting himself be anchored. His body still shook, his breaths still uneven, but he no longer felt utterly alone. Minutes passed. The rain continued its quiet rhythm outside, but inside, the storm was subsiding. Jungkook's presence, steady and warm, became the eye of the hurricane. "You don't have to face this alone," Jungkook said, tightening his grip just slightly. "Ever." Taehyung's eyes met his for a fraction of a second, a silent, hesitant acknowledgement of trust. No words were needed, not yet. Later, after the panic had ebbed but not completely disappeared, Jungkook helped Taehyung back to the bedroom. He guided him gently, letting him cling to his arm like a lifeline. Taehyung's small, fragile gestures, the way he leaned subtly against Jungkook, were enough to make Jungkook's chest ache with protective tenderness. That night, Taehyung didn't sleep in separate room. Not fully. Instead, he lay close enough to Jungkook that the warmth of his body, the steady rise and fall of his chest, became a blanket, a shield against the shadows of the past. And Jungkook, who had once resented the sudden circumstances that forced them together, felt something undeniable, a need to protect, to soothe, to hold, and maybe, unknowingly, the beginning of love. The mansion's walls no longer felt as cold. The darkness, though still daunting, was no longer a prison. With Jungkook as his anchor, Taehyung found a space where fear could ebb and trust could begin to. KM's earliest memories were not filled with laughter or warmth. The Kim mansion, vast and glittering from the outside, had always felt like a cage to him. Behind the polished walls and grand chandeliers lay fear, cruelty, and isolation. his stepmother's shadow looming over every moment of his life. As a child, Taehyung was timid, gentle, and trusting, but to his stepmother, he was nothing more than a tool to assert control. She would belittle him constantly, making sure he felt small, worthless, and unwanted. Every mistake, no matter how tiny, was met with sharp words, harsh slaps, and endless ridicule. When Taehyung was just 7 years old, the abuse escalated to something far darker. One evening, after accidentally spilling water on her favorite carpet, his stepmother's face twisted with rage. She grabbed him roughly by the arm, dragging him down the long corridor to a small, windowless room in the far corner of the house. The door slammed shut behind him with a hollow thud, leaving him in pitch-black darkness. The smell hit him first, musty, wet, and terrifying. He fumbled along the walls, his tiny fingers brushing against droppings, the cold floor beneath him sticky. And then he heard it, the skittering of rats. They moved quickly, their sharp claws scratching against the floor and walls. Panic seized him. Taehyung screamed at the top of his lungs, pounding on the door. "Help! Please! Someone help me!" But no one came. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed in a blur of terror. He could feel the rats brushing against his skin, their tiny teeth nipping at his heels. His small body shook violently, and tears streamed down his cheeks. But the darkness swallowed his cries. The cruel laughter of his stepmother echoed faintly through the walls, a reminder that this was punishment, and no one would rescue him. By the time she finally opened the door, Taehyung was pale, trembling uncontrollably, and silent. His voice, once soft and timid, had disappeared. He tried to speak, tried to explain the horror, but the words refused to come. The trauma was too much. The fear, the isolation, the helplessness. It had stolen his voice. From that day forward, Taehyung became mute, not by choice, but by the cruel weight of his experiences. He learned quickly that silence was safer. If he said nothing, perhaps no one would notice him or hurt him. If he spoke, it might invite more anger, more punishment. And so the boy grew up behind a wall of quiet, his heart heavy with unspoken pain, his eyes holding the stories he could never tell. Even as he matured, the echoes of that dark room haunted him. The smell, the cold, the rats, the isolation. And deep down, he carried the unshakable fear that no one could love a boy who had been broken in silence. The mansion was quiet again the next morning, but the atmosphere felt different, less cold, less formal, as if the air itself had softened. Jungkook moved through the hallways with a heightened awareness of Taehyung's presence. The panic of the previous night had left a residue of unease in Taehyung, and Jungkook's instincts were sharper than ever. He found Taehyung in the kitchen, delicately arranging a tray with tea and toast. His hands were careful, deliberate, precise, still carrying that old habit of control from years of surviving cruelty. Jungkook paused in the doorway, observing. "You don't have to do that," Jungkook said softly, stepping closer. "I can handle breakfast." Taehyung froze, eyes flicking toward him, and then immediately lowered again, almost ashamed that he had been preparing it at all. Jungkook's chest tightened. I just thought. Taehyung's hand trembled slightly as he placed the final piece of toast on the tray. Words weren't coming, but Jungkook understood. A subtle gesture, the smallest act of care, and his heart thudded against his ribs. "You didn't have to," he said again, kneeling to take the tray. "But thank you." Taehyung blinked, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, then nodded. That nod alone said more than words ever could. The days blended into one another, quiet but heavy with unspoken emotions. Small moments became their language. The way Taehyung poured tea just so. The way he lingered near Jungkook without intruding. The tiny glances that flickered and disappeared before Jungkook could fully capture them. All of it began weaving a delicate thread between them. The afternoon sun cast soft golden light across the mansion's polished floors. The tranquility of the garden was interrupted by the sudden, deliberate click of heels on marble. Taehyung stiffened, sensing the unwelcome presence before they even stepped into the hall. Taehyung-ah, a smooth, cold voice called, dripping with false sweetness. It was Han-soo-jin, his stepmother, her designer bag dangling from her wrist like a weapon. Behind her, his father trailed with an indifferent expression, as though he were merely accompanying her for appearances. Taehyung's chest tightened. Memories of harsh words, cruel laughter, and endless mental manipulation bubbled up, each one sharper than the last. He shrank slightly, lowering his gaze, hands clenching into fists at his sides. Hyejin smiled, venom masked by elegance. "We came to see our dear Taehyung. My, you look so different, so quiet." Her eyes flicked toward Jungkook, lingering like a challenge. Jungkook's sharp gaze caught the subtle malice in her tone immediately. His hand brushed slightly against Taehyung's, a silent anchor. But his eyes never left Hyejin. "Is there something you need?" he asked, calm but firm. Hyejin's smile tightened. "Oh, nothing urgent. Just checking on my stepson. I do hope you're adjusting well to married life. You must remember, Taehyung, your family's reputation is..." Her words dripped with judgment. But Taehyung flinched at every syllable. He had heard this before. Insults, thinly veiled as concern. Reminders of inadequacy drilled into him since childhood. His voice caught in his throat, his fingers trembling as he fidgeted with the hem of his sleeve. Before Hyejin could continue, Jungkook stepped closer, his presence towering but steady, protective. His voice was low, carrying weight without yelling. "That's enough." Hyejin tilted her head, incredulous. "Excuse me? You dare?" Taehyung's heart pounded in his chest, but he felt a spark of courage at Jungkook's side. Something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone to face the storm. Summoning every ounce of strength, he stepped forward, his hands rising slightly in a gesture of defiance. His eyes, deep, unspoken yet screaming with restrained pain, met Hyejin's. Though his voice was absent, the intensity in his gaze said everything. "I will not be afraid. Not anymore." Jungkook's hand found his, squeezing gently, angering him, and then he faced Hyejin fully. "You are not welcome here to hurt him. He is my husband, and I will not let anyone treat him this way." Hyejin's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, a flash of anger and disbelief crossing her features. Taehyung felt the tremor of fear in his chest, but Jungkook's steady presence was like sunlight cutting through darkness. Taehyung took a deep breath and gestured sharply at her, his chin lifting in defiance. His stepmother's eyes widened at the silent confrontation. Her stepson, the boy she had tried to break mentally, was finally standing up for himself. Jungkook mirrored his stance, silent but fierce. Together, they radiated a shield of unspoken strength. Hyejin's smile turned brittle. "We'll see about that," she hissed, retreating slightly but maintaining her posture of superiority. Jungkook didn't move. His gaze never wavered. "Leave now, or I will ask you to leave permanently. Taehyung does not need this, and neither do I." For the first time, Taehyung felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Safe. the weight on his chest lifted slightly, replaced by the warmth of being seen, being protected, being loved in a way that words could barely express. Huye-jin's fury simmered, but she knew the fight had shifted. With one last scornful glance, she signaled Minho, and they left, heels clicking against the floor, leaving behind the oppressive air. Taehyung exhaled, trembling, and Jungkook drew him into a protective hug, resting his chin gently on Taehyung's head. "You don't have to face them alone anymore," he whispered softly. Taehyung buried his face in Jungkook's chest, the silent tears spilling freely now, not of fear, but of relief. For the first time, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he could finally belong somewhere safe, warm, and filled with love. The evening air was cool and quiet, the mansion dimly lit by golden chandeliers. Taehyung sat near the fireplace, knees drawn up to his chest, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. Jungkook lingered nearby, watching silently. It had become a pattern now, shared silences, small gestures, and moments where the world shrank to just the two of them. Tonight, something in the firelight made Jungkook's chest tighten. The way Taehyung's shoulders curved inward, the fragile tension in his hands, the quiet courage it took him to simply exist without flinching. Jungkook moved closer, sitting on the rug beside him. "You don't have to sit alone," he murmured, voice soft. Taehyung hesitated, then tilted his head slightly. A silent invitation. He shifted, letting Jungkook's presence draw near. The first touch was tentative. Jungkook brushed a stray lock of hair from Taehyung's face, fingers lingering at the temple. Taehyung didn't pull away, his first sign of trust in this intimate space. A shiver ran through him, and Jungkook noticed, chest tightening with protectiveness. Slowly, carefully, Jungkook extended an arm. "Come closer," he whispered. Taehyung leaned in, almost imperceptibly. Jungkook's arm wrapped around his shoulders, pulling him gently into a side hug. The warmth of Jungkook's body pressed against him, solid and grounding. For the first time, Taehyung allowed himself to breathe fully, the walls of fear around him softening. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound, the crackle of the fire, and the steady rhythm of their breathing. And yet, that silence carried weight, a shared intimacy deeper than words could capture. Taehyung rested his head lightly on Jungkook's chest, and the small contact sent a rush of something unspoken through them both. "You're safe," Jungkook whispered, tone almost a caress. "I've got you." Taehyung's hand brushed against Jungkook's arm, hesitant at first, then firmer. It was a gesture of trust and gratitude, and Jungkook responded by tightening the hug just slightly, anchoring him against the shadows of the past. The minutes stretched, suspended in warmth and quiet understanding. Then, tentatively, Taehyung moved closer, pressing himself into Jungkook's chest with a subtle, deliberate urgency. Jungkook's fingers threaded into his hair, holding him close, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. The emotional intimacy began to bloom into something deeper. Jungkook's hand moved gently from shoulder to back, mapping out the tense lines of muscles still hardened by years of fear. Taehyung shivered, leaning instinctively closer, seeking the warmth, the reassurance, the unspoken promise of protection. "Detract me. Trust me," Jungkook murmured softly, almost to himself. Taehyung didn't respond verbally. Instead, he pressed his lips against Jungkook's chest in a fleeting, delicate kiss, eyes closing briefly. A silent answer, filled with vulnerability, gratitude, and an emerging desire. The firelight danced across their faces, illuminating the tender expressions that words could never convey. Each touch, each brush of skin against skin, carried weight. Their closeness was not rushed. It was deliberate, careful, and intimate. Every contact deepened their bond. Every shared breath became a bridge between past pain and present comfort. Jungkook's hands cupped Taehyung's face gently, lifting it until their eyes met. The intensity in the gaze was raw, unguarded, and full of emotion. Slowly, hesitantly, their lips met in a soft, lingering kiss, a culmination of trust, longing, and tenderness. The moment stretched, delicate and fragile, until the fire's warmth and their shared closeness dissolved the remaining distance between them. Taehyung melted into Jungkook's embrace, trembling slightly, but for the first time, trembling with something other than fear.
They parted only to breathe, foreheads resting together. The mansion, the shadows, the walls, they all faded. There was only this, the warmth of each other, the safety found in the other's arms, and the promise of more moments like this to come. Jungkook whispered, "I won't let anyone hurt you. Not ever. Not again." Taehyung's response was a small, shivering nod against his chest. Words weren't needed. Not now. Their closeness, the tenderness, the slow intimacy, this was their language, their sanctuary, and the beginning of love that would heal the wounds of the past. The days became a rhythm of shared life. Breakfast together, quiet walks in the garden, evenings by the fire, lingering touches in hallways, and soft kisses in corners of empty rooms. Jungkook began noticing more. The way Taehyung flinched at sudden noises, the way his hands trembled when nervous, the small smile he gave when praised or appreciated. Every small gesture was a window into his past, a glimpse of the fragile soul beneath layers of trauma. He held Taehyung a little longer, kissed him a little more carefully, whispered reassurances whenever shadows of the past surfaced, and Taehyung, in turn, allowed himself to trust completely, leaning on Jungkook's chest, pressing his warmth against him, offering quiet, tender acts of care in return. The mansion, once cold and forbidding, now hummed with intimacy, trust, and desire. The walls no longer carried judgment, they carried warmth. And in the quiet darkness, with bodies close, fingers entwined, and hearts beating together, the two men had created a world where scars could heal, where love could flourish, and where the past could finally rest. The night was quiet, but the mansion felt alive with a warmth that had never been there before. Taehyung and Jungkook lay together in the bedroom, bodies pressed close, breaths mingling in the soft darkness. The fire from the fireplace outside the window cast flickering shadows across the room, painting their skin in warm golds and soft browns. Jungkook's hand traced the curve of Taehyung's back, careful, gentle, lingering where the tension of old scars still lived. Taehyung shivered slightly at the touch, but leaned into it, letting himself relax in the safety of Jungkook's arms. The intimacy was slow, deliberate, filled with pauses where neither spoke, only breathed and shivered in the heat of shared warmth. Each kiss, each soft sigh deepened their connection, not just physical, but emotional. By the early hours, they lay tangled together, hearts beating in sync, the silence around them more comforting than any words. Eventually, Jungkook rolled slightly, planting a soft kiss on Taehyung's forehead. "I'll make you breakfast," he whispered. "You stay here." Taehyung nodded, still nestled against him, and watched Jungkook leave for the kitchen. There was a domestic intimacy in the gesture, a rhythm of shared life that had begun to feel natural. The kitchen was warm with the smell of butter and sizzling onions. Jungkook moved with ease, flipping eggs, stirring sauces, humming softly. He was entirely focused on cooking, lost in the care of preparing something for Taehyung. Outside the kitchen window, the morning sunlight streamed in, but Jungkook didn't notice the faint smoke curling from the stove. The flame had licked up slightly from the pan, small at first, but growing fast. But before he could act, the smoke thickened, the acrid scent filling the kitchen. Jungkook! The scream was sharp, piercing, raw. It was Taehyung's voice. Jungkook froze mid-motion, eyes snapping to Taehyung standing in the doorway, panic clear on his face. Fire. Taehyung's words came in full, strong, unbroken. His voice returned. Not just a whisper, but a command born from fear and urgency. Jungkook turned sharply, grabbing a towel to beat down the small flames, heart hammering. Not with fear for himself, but for Taehyung. The young man's face was pale, eyes wide, hands trembling, but his presence had saved them both. As the last of the fire hissed and died under Jungkook's hands, he turned toward Taehyung, who was still trembling but watching him intently. Jungkook pulled him close without hesitation, pressing his forehead against Taehyung's. "You're safe," Jungkook whispered, voice soft but full of awe. "You saved me, and you found your voice." Taehyung blinked, lips trembling, then laughed softly, incredulous, disbelief and relief mingling. I can speak." "Yes," Jungkook murmured, holding him tighter. "And it's perfect." For the first time in years, Taehyung felt fully alive, fully heard, and fully safe. The fire had been terrifying, but it had also broken the last barrier. His silence. Jungkook's presence, his protection, and the sheer adrenaline of fear had pushed his voice back to the surface. They stayed in the kitchen like that for a long while, holding each other, the smoke lingering faintly, the burnt smell heavy but irrelevant. Words flowed now between them, not just help or stop, but laughter, murmurs, and soft confessions. Their intimacy, emotional and physical, had reached a new depth, strengthened by trust, protection, and shared vulnerability. Later, they finally resumed breakfast, sitting side by side at the table, hands brushing, voices blending naturally. Taehyung's smile was brighter than Jungkook had ever seen, and every time their fingers touched, every soft glance exchanged, it spoke of healing, love, and safety that neither had known before. The mansion was quiet again. Not the cold kind of quiet Taehyung grew up with, but the soft, lived-in warmth that felt like morning sunlight settling gently on the skin. It had been a year since the wedding chaos. A year since Lisa's runaway. Since scars from the past began to loosen their grip. Since Jungkook slowly, carefully opened doors Taehyung never knew he was allowed to step through. The garden had changed. The roses Taehyung once tended with trembling hands were tall now, blooming in deep red and pale cream. A new peach tree grew near the corner. Jungkook had planted it with him on their first spring together. Taehyung walked between the flowers barefoot, the cool grass brushing his ankles. His steps were lighter now, his breathing calmer, his hands steadier. He was not the trembling boy who flinched at footsteps in hallways. He was someone new, someone growing, someone loved. A soft footstep behind him made him turn. Jungkook was standing at the terrace door, hair messy from sleep, shirt loose, eyes still warm from dreaming. When he looked at Taehyung, really looked at him, his gaze softened the way it had 100 times before, the way Taehyung was still learning to believe. "Good morning," Jungkook murmured. Taehyung smiled, small, beautiful, real, and said back, "Good morning." Jungkook stepped down from the terrace and walked toward him, grass brushing his ankles too. When he reached Taehyung, he didn't say anything at first. He simply wrapped his arms around Taehyung from behind. Resting his chin on his shoulder, Taehyung leaned into him without hesitation. That still amazed Jungkook, the way Taehyung no longer hid the softness in him. The past still existed, but it no longer ruled him. After a moment, Jungkook whispered, "You're glowing today." Taehyung rolled his eyes, cheeks warming, but Jungkook laughed softly and brushed a kiss to the side of his neck. A quiet, loving kiss that made Taehyung's heart flutter like wings. Then Jungkook held out something small, a folded envelope. Taehyung blinked, confused. "Open it," Jungkook said, smiling gently. Taehyung unfolded the paper. It was a registration form for a music academy, a prestigious one. His breath caught. "You can audition whenever you want," Jungkook said softly. "If you want to. If you don't, that's fine too. I just thought maybe the world deserves to hear the way you speak." Taehyung's eyes filled instantly, not with fear, not with shame, with something he never thought he'd be allowed to feel again. Dreams. He turned, grabbing Jungkook's wrist with both hands, shaking his head in disbelief, overwhelmed. Jungkook cupped his face gently.